Listen closely to his voice. There's no panic, no confusion, no chaos, just clarity. Too much clarity. When investigators replayed this 911 call, they didn't hear shock. They heard structure. Daniel Mercer wasn't reacting. He was performing. And performances can be rehearsed. At 9:42 p.m., Daniel dialed emergency services from his kitchen. He told the operator his wife had fallen down the basement stairs. He described where she was lying, her breathing, the way her arm was positioned beneath her body. His voice stayed level, measured. When asked how long she had been there, he answered immediately. About 10 minutes. I was upstairs finishing some work. No hesitation, no uncertainty. Most people in moments of crisis speak in fragments. They contradict themselves. They ask the same question twice. Daniel did none of that. Instead, he narrated, almost like someone recounting a memory rather than living through it. And there was something else. In the entire call, he never once asked if she could still be saved. On the surface, Daniel Mercer was exactly what the neighborhood expected. 34, insurance adjuster. Married for 6 years, quiet, responsible, predictable. Neighbors described the couple as normal. No loud arguments, no police visits, no obvious warning signs. Emily worked part-time at a local dental office. She was described as warm, social, the one who remembered birthdays. If there were problems in the marriage, they weren't visible from the outside. But visibility and reality are rarely the same thing. Investigators arrived within minutes. Emily was found at the base of the wooden staircase leading to the basement. One shoe had come off. There was visible bruising near her temple. Daniel stood nearby, calm. He answered questions before they were fully asked. Yes, she must have slipped. Yes, she was carrying laundry. Yes, she's fallen before. Nothing serious. He used the word accident 3 times within the first 5 minutes. No one had suggested it yet. Paramedics transported Emily to the hospital. She was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Cause, blunt force trauma. Daniel cried at the hospital, but nurses later described the tears as controlled, not explosive, not erratic, just enough. The first re-listen of the 911 call happened 2 days later. It was routine, but something felt off. One investigator noted how Daniel introduced the situation. He didn't say, I think something happened. He didn't say, I don't know what's going on. He said, my wife fell down the basement stairs. Definitive, conclusive, almost diagnostic. He had already decided what happened, and that certainty began to feel strange. Because in most accidents, people question what they're seeing. They doubt themselves. They search for alternatives. Daniel did not. A closer look at the house added another layer. There were no signs of scattered laundry on the stairs, no broken railing, no skid marks on the wooden steps. The basement light was off when paramedics arrived. Daniel claimed he hadn't gone down yet, that he saw her from the top, which raised another question. If he hadn't descended the stairs, how had he known her exact position so clearly? Still, there wasn't enough for suspicion. Accidents happen. People process trauma differently. Calm doesn't equal guilt. But calm combined with clarity, and clarity combined with certainty, begins to form a pattern. And patterns are what investigators look for. 3 days later, they requested Daniel's phone. Standard procedure, call logs, texts, timestamps. Nothing alarming at first, until a digital forensic analyst opened his browser history. 2 weeks before Emily's death, Daniel had searched, what injuries are consistent with falling downstairs? The search was made at 1:13 a.m. 3 days later. How long before bruising appears after impact? And then, do emergency calls get analyzed? The final search happened 8 days before the incident. Late at night, private browsing mode, but not private enough. When confronted, Daniel explained it away. He said he had been writing an insurance risk report, that he was researching claims, that it was work-related, technically possible. But investigators checked. No such case had been assigned to him. The calm voice on the call started to feel different now. Not steady, strategic, like someone who had already rehearsed the sequence in his head. Call, explain, establish accident, control the narrative early, because in high-stress moments, the first version often sticks. And Daniel had delivered his version flawlessly, almost too flawlessly, but there was still no direct proof, no eyewitness, no confession, just a voice, a staircase, and a search history that felt uncomfortably timed. Then a neighbor came forward. She mentioned something small. The night before Emily died, she had heard raised voices, a sharp thud, and then silence. She hadn't thought much of it. Until she listened to the news report the next day, the timeline began to shift, and when investigators compared phone data with Daniel's statement, they noticed something that didn't align. But that part of the story changes everything, and it begins not with the fall, but with the delay. The timeline didn't break loudly. It fractured quietly. Investigators pulled Daniel's phone location data. At 9:31 p.m., his device registered movement, not upstairs as he had claimed, but near the basement staircase, 9 minutes before the 911 call. He had told operators he found Emily around 9:40, but his phone suggested he was already downstairs earlier, and there was something else. At 9:34 p.m., his phone screen activated. No call, no text, just activity. 3 full minutes passed before the emergency call was placed. 3 minutes in a house where he claimed he had just discovered his wife unconscious. 3 minutes is long in an emergency. Long enough to check for breathing. Long enough to attempt CPR. Long enough to panic. But Daniel did none of those things. Instead, he called it 9:42, calm and organized, as if the decision had already been made. When investigators brought him back in for a second interview, they didn't accuse him. They let him talk. And Daniel talked. He repeated the same timeline, the same phrasing, the same sequence. Word for word, it was consistent, too consistent. Real memory shifts slightly under pressure, details blur, stress reshapes recollection. But Daniel's story remained untouched, polished, like something memorized. Then they asked about the 3-minute gap. He paused. For the first time, he paused. I must have been in shock, he said. But shock had not appeared in his voice on the 911 call. And now it sounded forced. He adjusted his posture, crossed his arms, began answering more cautiously. Micro shifts, small but visible. The structure in his speech began to loosen. And that's when investigators leaned in. They revisited the staircase. Forensics returned to the house. The angle of impact didn't fully match a fall. Bruising on Emily's wrist suggested restraint, not imbalance. There were faint marks near her collarbone. Pressure, not collision. A fall can be chaotic. This didn't look chaotic. It looked directed. Then came the financial records. 6 months earlier, Daniel had increased Emily's life insurance policy substantially. He had also taken on private debt, credit cards nearing their limit, missed payments hidden from Emily. There were arguments according to text messages recovered from her phone. Not explosive, but tense. She had confronted him about money. She had suggested separating accounts. Control, once threatened, can trigger desperation, and desperation seeks solutions, some more permanent than others. The final piece came from the basement light switch. Fingerprints revealed Daniel's touch. Recent, yet he had claimed he never went fully downstairs before calling 911. He had described her position from the top step, but the light switch was at the bottom, and the bulb was warm when paramedics arrived. He had been down there, before the call, long enough to turn on the light, long enough to stage, long enough to think. When presented with the evidence, Daniel didn't confess. He didn't break down. He didn't explode. He stayed composed. He asked for a lawyer. Even that felt measured. At trial, the prosecution focused on the call. They played it in court. The jury listened carefully. That calm voice filled the room again. Clear, sequential, controlled. The prosecutor paused the audio at one point. "Notice," or she said, how he introduces the word accident before anyone else does. Small detail, but powerful, because whoever controls the first narrative often controls perception. And Daniel had tried to control everything, from the staircase to the timeline, to the tone of his own voice. The defense argued shock. They argued trauma response. They argued that not everyone screams. And they were right. Not everyone does. But rehearsed calm is different from stunned silence. One is instinct, the other is intention. The verdict came after 6 hours of deliberation. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Daniel Mercer showed little reaction as the sentence was read. 25 years. No visible collapse. No visible regret. Just stillness. The same stillness that had filled the 911 call. Years later, the recording still circulates in legal training seminars, not because it was loud, not because it was dramatic, but because it was composed. It's used as an example of how presentation can mask preparation, how structure can disguise strategy, and how sometimes the most dangerous thing in a crisis isn't panic, it's control. If you listen carefully to Daniel's voice today, it still sounds convincing. It still sounds like a husband describing an accident. But once you know what came before it, the searches, the delay, the 3 quiet minutes, the calm doesn't feel natural anymore. It feels practiced. And that may be the most unsettling part, because panic can't be rehearsed, but performance can.